Hello, you're listening to Future Artifacts FM, a radio show hosted by Neve Schmidtke and Nina Davies.
Earlier this year, several radio frequencies were discovered airing a collection of broadcasts. At first, they sounded like regular news stories and interviews. They felt familiar, but also not quite belonging to our present. Slowly, the listeners came to believe that what they were listening to did indeed belong to their world, just not their time. They were looking into the future through the mundane edges of radio recordings and public service announcements. While this material is still being meticulously studied by researchers in various universities and museums, your hosts have managed to gain access to this collection to air a selection of these broadcasts for you, our listeners.
For full disclosure, we will not be sharing this collection with you, as this introduction is based on a fictional event. In this monthly broadcast, Future Artifacts FM, we will present speculative fiction pieces by artists and writers, followed by conversation with hosts Neve Schmidtke and Nina Davies. The programme will focus on fictional works intended for broadcast, such as radio plays or fictional interviews, to carve out a better understanding of the now by exploring various interpretations of the future.
Welcome back to Future Artifacts FM. As per usual, I'm your host, Nina Davies.
And Neve Schmidtke.
And today we are joined by David Blandy.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
This is our final episode with Het Hems the Couch on our mini-series on technology and magic.
We're really excited that you accepted our invitation. I think ages back when we first started the radio show, we were thinking about like who would be our list of dream guests, and we've been lucky to work with a few people like John K. Shaw, who co-edited Fiction as Method, and also Erica Scorty, who's got an amazing kind of auto-fiction, auto-theory practice. But also your name came up as well as someone who we always viewed from afar, and it's like someday. But for anyone who is new to David's work, we're going to read out his bio briefly. So David Blandy, born 1976, lives and works in Brighton. He makes works that slip between performance and video, digital and analog, investigating the stories and cultural forces that inform and influence our lives. Collaboration is central to his practice, examining communal and personal heritage and interdependence. With research spanning multiple forms of archive, from historic texts to academic archives, archaeology and ecological theory, Twitch streams and film archives, Blandy weaves poetic works that explore the complexities of the contemporary subject. Blandy's projects involve complex installations, performance, writing, gaming and sound. And we're very, very happy to have him on the show.
So today we're going to be listening to David's work, The End of the World, which was made in 2017. It was originally made for it's a video work within an installation. David, is there anything else you want to say about the...
It kind of came from wanting to make something riffing on the idea of an observatory. So the video installation is like you're sitting inside a kind of observatory kind of space. You're surrounded by 3 different screens and looking into space as you're listening to this voice.
So then people can just close your eyes and imagine that make your own observatory when you're listening to it.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll just get into the work. We'll save the rest of the conversation for the end of the world.
Beware, we will be talking about a lot of endings in this
Yeah.
episode.
Great.
It's about 13 minutes long, and we'll meet you back at the end.
Bye.
The formation of the solar system began 4.6 billion years ago with the gravitational collapse of a small part of a giant molecular cloud. Most of the collapsing mass collected in the centre, forming the Sun, while the rest flattened into a protoplanetary disk, out of which the planets, moons, asteroids and other small solar system bodies formed. Volcanic outgassing created the primordial atmosphere, and then the ocean of early Earth. Much of the planet was molten because of frequent collisions with other bodies. Over time, the Earth cooled, causing the formation of a solid crust and allowing liquid water to exist on the surface. The geological timescale describes time from the beginning of the Earth. The Hadeanian is the time before the fossil record of life beginning on Earth. The Archean and Proterozoic define the periods where the natural processes were set in motion by which life arises from non-living matter, and then the evolution of early life. Then comes the Mesozoic, which spanned the rise, reign and climatic extinction of the huge dinosaurs. And the Cenozoic, which presented the subsequent development of dominant mammals on Earth. Hominids, the earliest direct ancestors of the human clade, rose sometime during the latter part of the Miocene epoch. Across eons, there were couples, families, clans, tribes, and in the last milliseconds of geological time, nations. The word nation stems from the Latin verb nasci, to be born, and originally meant a group of people born in the same place, whether that place was thought of as a dozen or many thousands of square miles. A nation is either synonymous with a state or its inhabitants, or else denotes a human group bound together by a common solidarity. Genocide has 8 stages, and each stage reinforces the others. Classification, symbolization, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, extermination, and denial. People have been and continue to be stigmatized, dehumanized, and discriminated against. They have been harassed, terrorized, and slaughtered. They have been isolated and segregated into detention camps and securitized villages and ghettos. They have been systematically weakened through hunger, illness, and loss of livelihood. It's not the end of the world. Everyone's seen the darkness coming. It's nothing new. It's an everyday reality. What it disrupts is an idea of history, of progress, that things are getting better, slowly, that we're coming to resolutions, understandings. But it seems to be very simple. It was all an illusion. Was this just an isolated moment in the history of humanity, geographically isolated from the violence, insulated from the terror of international finance, safety nets being snipped away, nations slowly conceding defeat, unable to hold back hate any longer? But how do you live? How do you live with the look in your father's eyes? It's a death sentence. Everyone goes eventually. But I have a schedule. He is the Übermensch, man of steel, quiet force of nature. Eschatology is the study of last things, the end of the world. The phrase refers to the end of ordinary reality, a change of states, a new operating system for Earth. In many religions it is taught as an existing, immutable future event, prophesied in texts and folklore. The ancient Greeks arrived at their eschatology by considering the functions of the mind as a purely spiritual essence, independent of the body, and having no beginning or end. We had a dog. He was life. Warm shit grasped through a plastic bag, skipping through the woods like a deer, chasing squirrels and phantoms. The sad eyes that plead for dried chicken. We tried to tame his wild nature, but some damage cannot be undone. An apocalyptic pseudo-prophecy exists, attributed to the Tibetan Sibyl. It purports to prophesy the advent of a final emperor named Constans, vanquishing the foes of Christianity, bringing about a period of great wealth and peace. After vanquishing Gog and Magog, the emperor is said to resign his crown to God. This would give way to the Antichrist. We know that the shaking will just get worse, and we're slowly letting go of the future tense. Disintegration in slow motion. The Challenger exploding at 3 frames a second. Once put in motion, the process has its own momentum. The total entropy of an isolated system can only increase over time. The horror of waking up to the New World Order, conspiracies accidentally verified. The bogeymen were real after all. The Norse Ragnarok is a classic in apocalyptic literature. There is no after in the Ragnarok. The gods battle with Loki, the god of mischief and chaos, the frost giants, the Midgard serpent, and a huge wolf. In the resulting chaos, almost everyone on both sides is killed and one survivor burns up the rest of the universe. Stars fall, the sun dims, and the ocean covers the earth. This isn't a video that I thought I was going to do. Today is the day, the last day. I will visit my house one last time and explore again before the end. A last visit to my hometown. This is Maoi, where I grew up. There are only a few minutes left. It's time to join the others. We will regroup at Asheron's castle to all die together, side by side, all united. It is time. This is how it ended, but the memories will live forever. I don't know if I'm ready for this, guys. I've known that it would be coming to an end. People begging for just a few more hours. They want to be here for the final moments. People are logging in for this final day. It's the end of the world, but everything's free. People are here to be in the world when it all ends today. Guys, we're almost at the end here. I thought I was strong enough. I thought I wouldn't be affected emotionally. It hit me hard. I remember weeping for this guy who left, who taught me everything about this place. Weeping, grieving for the first time. It's a game that I have so many memories of. This is hard. This is harder than I thought it would be. It's not so much this place. Yes, it has the deepest lore, but it's the people. People got married here. People have real friendships here. It breaks my heart to see it go down like this. For God's sake, don't end this. It's going to be gone forever, guys. Look at all these good people. Look at the community. Everyone screaming their last goodbye. We don't want to log out. Oh my God. That's it. I'm glad I wasn't streaming this. It's the time investment. So many hours working and playing. It's the people. People share real life stories here. It's heartbreaking when this place goes away. Deep down in my heart, I know it's gone. Peace out, everybody. Take care. I love you all. This is where I grew up over 10 years. These were my friends growing up. If you hear this, I haven't played in 3 years, but I always knew I would come back to it. This was my home. Please don't let it go away. Don't let Dareth go to waste. All these good people, all of their items, and everything that we've worked for, the friendships and the relationships, and the marriages and the kids and the friends, everything that people have had. Don't let this go to waste. People know that the world is going to end, and all that's left to do is to watch. Real players experience the end of the world. Just people coming together to witness the end of the world, the solemn expressions on everyone's faces. And it's beautiful. How much would you have paid just to be there when it happened, experiencing the slow, somber moments of looming death overhead, before witnessing the beautiful destruction of a beautiful world? The connection to the server has been lost. In roughly 5 billion years, the sun will cool and expand outwards to many times its current diameter, before casting off its outer layers as planetary nebula and leaving behind a stellar remnant, a white dwarf. In the far distant future, the gravity of passing stars will gradually reduce the sun's retinue of planets. Some planets will be destroyed, others ejected into interstellar space. Ultimately, over the course of tens of billions of years, it is likely that the sun will be left alone, drifting through space.
Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed The End of the World. I know I did. David, to start off, I was wondering, obviously we've already introduced the work as it was made in 2017, but I was wondering whether you could just give us a little introduction into what brought the work on and what it was responding to at the time, sort of what ends, and then after that, how do you feel about returning to it now?
Yeah, it came at a very specific time. It came primarily as a reaction to what was happening politically. So Trump coming into the White House, the Brexit vote, things that I've reflected on in some ways with Larry Achimpong as well in our collaborative work with kind of finding Fanon and things. But also, yeah, and how that brought about a sense of grief, really, a sense of grief about the world, about ideas about what the world should be and what society should be. But these were mixing with all sorts of other feelings of grief. My father being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And then also thinking about virtual endings. So around exactly that year, it was the end of a particular MMO, massively multiplayer online game called Asheron's Call, and I got really interested in kind of people's reactions to that and how what it meant for a game world to end. And yeah, and really it's about the confusion of all those different feelings and how do we separate them? Do we want to? And kind of alongside that was a sort of more, I guess, philosophical idea about the power of the voice and the power of different modes of speaking and ideas of intimacy, and how, especially the intimacy of weird spaces like the observatory. So I'd gone on a holiday with my kids and partner to Copenhagen, and we'd gone into the observatory there, and there you put on little headphones and you're kind of guided through the universe by this kind of voice talking to you, and it's like it's just talking to you, and there's this real intense intimacy to that. And I wanted to see what happened when that intimacy turns into a different sort of intimacy. And so all of those things kind of came together into the film. It was sort of conceived as being like a wraparound video thing. It turned into like a 3-screen projection that was shown at 17 Gallery. And there is a VR version.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is very lonely indeed. It's funny. It's really funny re-listening to it now for lots of reasons. Partly technical reasons. I'm kind of thinking, wow, I really didn't do that many takes, did I? There's lots of mistakes in it. I can kind of hear breaths and stuff, but I kind of like that I do like that kind of unprofessionalism about it, which if I was to do it again today, I probably wouldn't allow.
Thinking about the end of the world in 2017, which I feel like is when, for me, that was when the first feelings of an end or ideas of an end kind of really started to come into my consciousness, or maybe 2016. And I'm wondering whether that kind of feeling of an end, whether that's just continued until now, or whether there's sort of, when you talk about Trump, kind of, it feels a bit like we're in a moment of deja vu again, where we're like, no, he couldn't possibly win again. Like, there's no way. But I'm like, that's exactly what we were saying last time, and it did happen. And it's sort of, I'm wondering whether it feels like it's kind of rebooted and restarted, or whether we've just been in the same situation.
I guess I think, we're just in a different period. There was kind of a sense when I was growing up, way back in 90s and noughties, that there was a kind of a certain, a kind of a certain world order, and when I went on a residency to Argentina, stayed in Rosario for 3 months, and was living there. They'd gone through the economic crisis in the early 2000s when the peso was devalued, and basically cartoneros, people who kind of collected cardboard in order to kind of recycle it, just appeared overnight. People's entire savings were wiped out. People who thought that they were comfortably middle class were suddenly actually quite poor. It's like it was a kind of real societal shift, and that again has happened all over again, kind of just this year. Not quite yet, but it's kind of it's really, really festering. Yeah, at that time when I was in Argentina, it kind of felt like, this could never happen. This could never happen in the UK or like in Europe, or like it's that sort of real hubris of the Westerner in a South American country, and it was all an illusion. That's kind of what the work is saying.
One of the things that really struck me about the piece is the work talks about the end of the world, but it also feels like it's talking about many different forms of collective grief, kind of this online community losing their shared space, the expansion of the sun in a distant future, kind of grieving the future of the sun in a way, and also the conditions of genocide, which, we're recording in January of 2023. 2024. You can tell we're into a new year. So it's kind of, we're also in the midst of what's the humanitarian crisis happening in Gaza and hostages and so forth. So it's like, it feels like very pertinent times. And I guess I'm thinking, considering these, personal and collective griefs of kind of both what was happening within your family and also politically, where do you think these spaces to express grief can exist? Like, this piece kind of felt like a place to sort of place those types of different griefs together. I'm wondering, kind of maybe now in the present, where are places where maybe as an artist you feel like you can place those griefs, or maybe even thinking about more broadly, kind of what are places where, when we're in the midst of all of this, grief, endings of worlds and so forth, where can we maybe put them?
I think art has an interesting space in that it is a space where people can come together. I was just at Larry's show the other night at Stanley Picker Gallery, which has just opened, and seeing these works that are about suicidal ideation and how the black body copes with modern life and legacies he's leaving to his son, thinking about all those things and watching them with people. So it's not just on a laptop, it's kind of seeing them with others. Just felt really important somehow to share that feeling. And I think I had a similar feeling being at the opening for my show of this work, where you'd see people sitting and just sitting through the whole, when you make a work, you don't know how people are going to react to it and how they're going to react to it in a space. But yeah, people would just kind of sit on the floor and watch the whole thing and kind of watch the planet spinning and kind of listen to this funny voice kind of going on quite a journey through all these different spaces. And yeah, there is play within the work. It's as much about how absurd it is to be talking about the death of an online space, or how do you equate the death of an avatar with, I don't know, a major illness for my father or something. Like these can't possibly be in the same register, and yet you feel them both. There's affect there, and it's real. And I think, an art space gives you a space a moment to be together in that feeling. But outside of that, I think it's got to be in community. It's got to be in finding people that you share ideas and about the world with, and realizing you're not alone. I think that's the really important thing, is to have a sense of solidarity, and that the kind of overwhelming voices that overcome kind of mass media, etc., aren't the only voices in the world. That there are other ways.
We were talking also about collective grief, and thinking about the many genocides that are happening across the world right now, and sort of how do you hold space for that within your body or a space with people? How do you know what to say, because you're all feeling it, but it's like also the words come out wrong or misconstrued, or create alliances that maybe are not there, or or it just feels like, but I'm one small person in a very big thing, so like what can I possibly do? So there's something about collective grief that for me was like really resonating across the piece, because maybe something I'm trying to figure out in the present as well.
I think so, absolutely. I think how do you respond to what's happening in Gaza and without it being just a meme on an Instagram, or like how can you really reflect the pain that it's causing, both there but also here in people's bodies? And it's something I wrestle with, I suppose.
Yeah. I was wondering whether you could just tell us a little bit more about Asheron's Call. Yeah,
Asheron's Call was a MMORPG, so that's I always get this wrong. It's massively multiplayer online RPG role-playing game that was on the PC. So it was it wasn't developed by Microsoft, but they kind of published it, and it was alive for I think it was, is it 17 years? It was a long time. So by the time it finished, graphically it was far superseded. Like it was really quite shonky in terms of graphics. But
what year would it have started?
It started, I think, around 2000. Yeah,
okay.
It's kind of that kind of time through to 2017. And towards the end, it was having it went through several different servers, and they weren't sure what to do with it, because not enough people were playing it to pay for it for the server time. And then eventually they just said, look, we're just going to shut it down. Some fans tried to group together to buy the IP, to buy the intellectual property, or to somehow host the server somewhere else, but they weren't able to. And so they gathered at the end to watch this kind of final moment, because when you die, you kind of go up in a puff of, I think it's like purple smoke or something.
I watched the video online. It's actually quite
it's quite
sad. I thought it was.
If you Google kind of end of Asheron's Call, you can see this clip that someone's made of them all kind of running to be together in the final moments. It's surprisingly moving for the graphics of the game. It makes you feel like, it's not something that you think you should be moved by, but at the end of it, you're almost like, that's quite touching, really.
Did you log in to Asheron's Call when it finished?
No, I never played the game.
Oh, you never played the game? Oh.
You know, I was it was something that I heard about once it was gone. Like I kind of it was through reading reports on like Kotaku and stuff that I kind of got quite fascinated with this space. And you know, gaming environments that I have been involved in, so you know, fighting games, Street Fighter, that sort of thing, they're not MMOs. They're kind of collectives of people who are all fascinated in the same thing, and it kind of that's a community that sort of evolves and changes over time, and kind of, you know, become lots of little beefs and things like that. But you know, the fact of, because I generally for RPGs I play games that are kind of self-contained, like sort of, you know, Final Fantasy VII or Chrono Trigger, or things where you're just one person working your way through a virtual environment. And there's moments in those that have been highly affecting, like I don't know, the death of Aerith in Final Fantasy VII. Sorry, spoiler. And just and kind of moments in Zelda. Where, I mean, sometimes it's just like the majesty of the landscape, but it's so much, you know, those are very individual spaces. Whereas I thought that, you know, this death of like, it's not just the death of individuals in a kind of virtual form, but it's a death of a community and a kind of communal idea of somewhere that you could return to. Like there's, a lot of the end section of the script is transcribed from different reports and kind of forum posts and things. And, you know, this idea that even though there's one guy saying, even though I wasn't playing it then, you know, it's a space that I always thought I could return to. It's sort of like a kind of childhood home that you think is always going to be there. It's almost like the impulse that exists for a lot of collecting of retro gaming and stuff. It's like trying to tangibly hold on to something, that kind of little piece of, maybe it's of your youth, or maybe it's of a youth that you never had, that you kind of, you know, you saw these cool things but you never were able to get them because they were too expensive, and now you know, I have this book, or I have this game, or, you know, like, and I can kind of live that possibility. Whereas this game is gone forever. That possibility of being inside that space is sort of more gone than it would have been if it had just been a cartridge on a game, which is kind of degrading. It's like, it's actually like it only exists in that collective. And so,
it's a death of an environment.
It's a death of a kind of a psychic space, you know. And it's not just a space where people are like, I don't know, having fun, like, again, like the comments say, it's a space where people are forming relationships, like, so they're forming friendships, but also, you know, loving relationships, etc. Like, one of my favorite things is like all this cry for all the items.
I know.
Like items have this kind of, it's sort of how you get a sense of a progression in a game. You know, it's kind of all the things you see in, especially in games like the Zelda games, where it's kind of, you know, it's through having this item that you can kind of access a whole other part of an environment or something. It becomes more than just like, oh, I've got a shiny iPhone. It's like it actually unlocks a different reality, you know. So kind of suddenly items mean something very different to something the very kind of prosaic, like bits of things, you know.
Yeah.
It's funny, like a kind of everyday word that becomes like a sort of shibboleth into a different culture. Yeah.
I mean, there's this one like really poetic line in the audio that I kind of keep on thinking back to, where I think you're talking about your father, but it's like, we stop thinking in future tense. And it's almost, I mean, it's maybe corny to bring it to the Asheron's call, but there's also a sense too of like, you can't think in the future tense anymore, because like it's ended in a way, like, I guess coming back to that idea of grief somehow, but also maybe thinking about, in terms of like items unlocking worlds, like, you know, an iPhone can unlock someone's world in a way, like, you know, it's quite a valuable piece of technology, or it's even just a place where you can maybe access that, you know, contemporary version of, I don't know what Asheron's called, the contemporary version of
that's absolutely true. It's like a portal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Each game relies on a set of logics to generate quests, community, or worlds. Can you share how this process of generating rules informed this work, or your practice more generally?
Yeah, rules is something... I think often my work comes out of rules, let's say. Whether that's from like some of my earliest works that people might have seen, like lip sync works where I'm lip syncing to a hip hop track like Bring the Ruckus by the Wu-Tang Clan. It's, you know, that work is defined by the length of the song. My actions are defined by the words of the song. The work is sort of defined very kind of rigidly around the object that I'm thinking about. Those rules, yeah, I kind of bent them and then broke them as I kind of kept making work. For a long time, I never wanted my voice to be in my work. It was always kind of other people's voices. But then eventually I started a work called Child of the Atom. I started letting my own writing and my own voice, I suppose, in a way. It's not my voice, but it's my writing, and it's voiced by one of my cousins, who is like the idea of what my daughter Phoebe would sound like when she was like in her teenage years, kind of reminiscing about this strange time with her dad when she was wandering around Hiroshima, thinking about this kind of the legacy of the Hiroshima bomb and how her great-grandfather believed that he wouldn't have existed if the Hiroshima bombing hadn't happened. So, which kind of has a pertinence to this particular work as a sort of a recall. Yeah. This was 2010, and yeah, in that work, another example. I think each work I kind of set up my own rules. In The End of the World, the rule was trying to bring together found texts, so kind of technical texts, texts from forums, these different types of writing, and then my own writing, and kind of trying to meld them together so that you're not quite sure what's written by me and what's genuine, what's authentic, but all the time trying to keep that sense of sincerity, because I sincerely understand and empathize with the people of Asheron's Call, and I'm kind of fundamentally interested in the history of the world and the future of the world. And so trying to kind of bring all of those different languages into a sort of similar space and see what happens, really. It's like all my work. It's often
sort of one narrative.
Yeah, yeah. It's like all my work. It's trying to bring an idea together and see what happens, because I'm very much a process-based artist. I don't know what the ending's going to be before I start. It's like, here's a bunch of ideas that I think are interesting. What could possibly happen if I just kind of saw this through and saw it to the end? And yeah, this is kind of what I ended up with. Yeah, but yeah, it's a set of rules. And then it's funny because now, like, kind of a whole part of my practice is actually making rules. So it's like tabletop role play, and you're kind of setting out rules for either a player to play by themselves and kind of understand a particular type of changing narrative, or for people to play together around a table under a set of rules that is often very light, but it kind of exists as a framework in which to have a fun conversation, a fun adventure. I
guess segueing from that, and also thinking about, because we've not touched on magic at all, and I guess part of the series is kind of thinking about maybe the connections or the relations between technology and magic. In many magical practices or kind of performing of rituals or spells, it must take place within the logics of often paganism or witchcraft or whichever kind of magical logic that you subscribe to. Or it's often in physical rather than virtual means, which is kind of interesting thinking about tabletop, because roleplay, because it's a physical experience often. Even if you're doing an online Dungeons and Dragons set, it's not about looking through the screen, it's about hearing what the dungeon master is telling you. So with this understanding of rule making or logics, how do you think magic kind of informs games or gaming? So like thinking about Asheron's Call as being this kind of wizardry, like they perform spells in Asheron's Call, but maybe also with the newer work, like I'm thinking about the show you did at Focal Point and that kind of future world magic creation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two strands here, in that there's the kind of overt ideas of magic, of the possibility of, in an imagined world, being able to do things that are outside of the human. So not only are you embodying post-human bodies in something like World After and kind of imagining a different potential existence, there's also the potential for, you know, your body to change radically, or to kind of to emit fire from your fingers, these sort of, you know, typical tropes of magic. But I think there's also, within both tabletop and video games, there's a sense of ritual and bringing about a certain space. So, you know, whether that's picking up a particular controller and kind of turning on the thing, and you enter into a semi sort of trance state where you're not in the space anymore. Like, I'm just thinking about, I'm currently obsessed with Street Fighter 6, and it's very much like you're suddenly in an environment with one other person, because you're against someone else online, and you're kind of trying to understand their brain, because that's what Street Fighter is essentially trying to read the other player and kind of play. And there's something about, this ritual of certain movements and kind of a trance-like state, which brings about kind of this altered consciousness of a sort. And I think that happens in tabletop play as well. It's like you have your preamble, like at the beginning of this podcast, where you're kind of, you're discussing what you have for breakfast, what you were doing with the day, the stresses of your life, and then it's like, right, should we play? And suddenly the game, the table changes. Like, suddenly everyone is inside a very different space, and they're all imagining this kind of space that's in between them, and it is like a sort of magic that it creates something very physical in between the players. It's not just like, here's a dungeon room. It's like everyone's imagining that dungeon room in their own particular way, but each of them is building it, and through that shared understanding of the space, it becomes kind of real, which is like, that's kind of magic.
It's like someone had introduced me to the concept of the astral plane. So where you can, I'm probably not going to talk about it properly because I've not really looked into it, but saying about how you can, like, some people practice it and are able to have like an out of body experience, and they'll be able to like see their friend locking up their house before they leave or something like that. When I was talking about it with this person, they were talking about how the digital kind of realm in general is sort of like this astral kind of hijack. It sort of hijacked our ability to be able to travel on the astral plane, because there's sort of this technology that kind of takes us there without us needing to practice that muscle. I know that's not what you're necessarily talking about.
But I think that's interesting. I mean, maybe it's hijacked it, but maybe it's helped more people sort of access that possibility of having these conversations across continents in a sort of very... I'm just thinking about my existence on various communities on Discord or something, where there's conversations that are going on that you kind of dip in and out of, and it's like you're part of a very extended sort of communal conversation that no one's sort of holding kind of power over, apart from, they're moderators or whatever, but it's like, it feels like very kind of loosely affiliated, and people riff off each other's comments, and it becomes, it's like a kind of external kind of group subconscious space.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that strikes me from how you're talking about magic and roleplay also is kind of the collective nature of it. It's kind of wondering, do you view magic as being something which is very collective, not necessarily needing to be physically manifested, but something that maybe requires kind of a collaborative nature, perhaps?
I think it helps. I think magic can happen for yourself. What is different names for different stuff, isn't it? But I guess I'm thinking of ideas of what some religions would call enlightenment or something. It's like these moments of clarity or kind of understanding of things. But as a kind of a solitary pursuit, it always feels like, was that real? But if you kind of share a moment with people, it gives it a different sort of validity, maybe.
Yeah.
Makes it more resonant, or can be. Just the fact of people reminiscing over adventures that they've had in a tabletop roleplay game, as though they're sort of reminiscing about things they did when they were a teenager or something. It's these strange, why are these memories so tangible?
Yeah.
But
On the show we talk about like using fiction as a tool. We were just talking now, I was suddenly thinking kind of magic operates in the sort of the same way as a tool to kind of, I guess as you're saying, David, to kind of bring people together, to kind of exit normal day and then enter this kind of role playing place together. And it makes me think of I was just reading about, I watched all the Lord of the Rings over Christmas, and I was starting to look up J.R.R. Tolkien, and before Lord of the Rings kind of took off, he was one of the first people to do a translation of Beowulf, linking it to socio-politics of that moment. And that's what J.R.R. Tolkien was saying. He was saying it's not a children's story about a dragon. It's actually about, if we read into it this way, we get a sort of historical kind of record of what was happening during those times. And I guess in that sense, that's an example of magic being used as a tool to tell a story in a different way, which is sort of how we talk about fiction.
Well, it's kind of like fiction can kind of enable the world where you can bring all these things together in a way that perhaps brings more coherence to present events. It kind of doesn't have to be like a series of kind of random things that are strung together, and like fiction maybe gives you the world where you can sort of make a more direct link in order to perhaps make better sense of it. And magic, or even like we talked a little bit about magical realism too, it allows you to maybe go to this extremity that maybe the physical world doesn't quite give you, but it kind of makes the sensation of something more like tangible or more like emotively real.
Yeah, I think where I've really felt that kind of visceral emotional tangibility of other possible worlds was probably in the work of Ursula Le Guin. Thinking of things like Left Hand of Darkness or The Dispossessed, where you really feel it doesn't feel so much like sci-fi, it's just life in a different place. And I think that's often what I'm trying to capture with my role-playing games, is kind of trying to enable that space for other people to embody this different reality, to think, could reality be different? So, once you've lived in it, it's like, actually, this is possible. That's the hope. and I think, artworks for me kind of, they offer that a similar sort of potential, both for solidarity, but for also rethinking the world and relations.
When did you start introducing tabletop games into your practice?
Yeah, that was explicitly with the show at Focal Point Gallery, which was The World After, which was because I saw it as an opportunity to try and explore that space. I'd been reading a lot of speculative fiction. I've been playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, primarily with my kids, to try and kind of have some relation with them that wasn't screen-based. So, like, we're hanging out, watching films or playing video games. It'd be nice to kind of actually just be together and kind of tell a story together. So kind of mid 2010s, so got back into it. I'd played my first role playing game when I was like 12, so it's kind of like a return to that kind of world, and played video games all between. And for a long time, my work kind of revolved around video games, or kind of skirted around them, and kind of made reference to them or been sort of about them. So it felt like an interesting moment to bring that together with a very site-specific history of a space that the work was going to be about, which is a place called Canvey Wick, which is a bit of Canvey Island, which was due to become an oil reserve in the early 70s, but then the oil crash happened and it was abandoned and left to nature. And so for the last 40 years, it's sort of nature has reclaimed that space, and it's now a site of scientific special interest, one of the most biodiverse spaces in the UK. So it felt like a place of hope. And after the end of the world, it was literally a follow-up to the end of the world. Was The World After, because it's like God, I've really gone deep into like the end. Like, what's next?
What work do I make after that?
Yeah, what do I leave for my children? You know, it's these kind of like, I've got to like, you know, and I see them growing, and I kind of want there to be hope in the world, and that's really where kind of that impetus to bring, and maybe that was part of the impetus to kind of shift the practice from being purely kind of like, I think there's a sense in which an artwork in which I'm kind of lecturing people in an observatory is kind of dictatorial, because it's like, here, listen to my voice. You know, it tries to be very open, but, you know, and I wanted it to be about other people's voices. And so that's where tabletop roleplay kind of made a lot of sense. You know?
After we'd had our kind of pre-show chat a week ago, Niamh, you brought up the Mark Fisher quote, "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism."
Yes, the very abbreviated quote that everyone
that everyone
loves.
uses. But I guess moving from the end of the world, like the work that you made, which is based on many ends, including the end of Asheron's Call, which is sort of a, maybe not corporate, but a sort of centralized, like a company owns the environment, let's say, to then moving into tabletop games, which the environment is not a commodity in any sort of sense. It's sort of something that exists within your mind. You can invite people in and share it with everyone, and they can take a piece of it and go away, but there's no sense of
you don't need to subscribe to something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a relationship that I've always had a very complicated kind of feelings about. You know, my obsession with hip hop music or like comics or whatever. You know, these are items. These are popular cultural kind of artifacts. They are consumer goods, and yet this kind of fandom exists around them, and that's what I like about Asheron's Call. It's like, yes, it's owned by a kind of massive corporation, but it's almost like it becomes about the people inside it. They form this community, so there's this sort of like push and pull between, you know, what is corporately owned, but then what is subverted by the people who actually use it and use it for their own kind of gratification, really, their own ends. And it's something I've always wrestled with. I kind of hate capitalism, and yet I love its results. I love the fact that I kind of, you know, I love Zelda. It's like, you know, that's a huge game made by a huge company. Like, it's, you know, it's produced sort of great feelings in me, and yet, you know, it's a 60 quid game on the Switch or something. It's like it's like it is a commodity. And to an extent, like, tabletop roleplay exists within that thing. You know, you're in order to play Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, you're supposed to buy 3 £50 books or something.
Right?
You know?
That's true. Yeah,
but it is, you know, what is amazing about it is that there is also this other whole kind of world. Like, I'm just thinking of the community that's around a game like Cairn, which is a kind of a very kind of lo-fi produced role-play game made by someone called Yahegal in America, and it is essentially is free online. Like, you can just download the PDF, print it at home, and there's a whole load of different adventures that you can play for it. And it's like, yeah, it's all about creating a community that is outside of that kind of commodification, and that's, you know, it's really incredible to see.
So this work begins with a selection of facts about the end of the world, or many different ends of worlds. About halfway through, we realize that the narrator belongs to a sort of semi-fictional world that is parallel to the one at the beginning. And first listening to it, I feel as though I've been sort of tricked, and that I'm set in a fictional story, or perhaps even like a conspiracy video. So would you say that fiction and reality exist on a spectrum, or do you define them as two separate places? I guess in that sense, between like a sort of the world of a game and the real world.
Yeah, I think the more you get into these spaces, the less that delineation becomes like something that you can really hold on to. Like, where does reality stop?
Yeah.
Or where does it start?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's something that's been at the heart of my practice since the very beginning. Kind of what this. Oh God, I kind of slipping into my artist statement. That kind of the slippage between reality and fiction, and like never. Yeah, I think it is a very unstable place, and I think maybe that is, exacerbated by my obsessions in that they all exist in sort of semi-fictive spaces. Like even music is an incredible fictional space. It's all about storytelling. I was listening again to Wu-Tang's Only Built for Cuban Links. It's like one of my favorite albums, and it's just so. I was thinking about it in the sense that it's like a kind of a deep nostalgia from the rappers themselves, because I think they're all telling stories from their teenage years, right? Like after the event, that they had really quite rugged lives, and then became rappers, and then they're getting all these stories from their times when they were kind of running about the streets and stuff, but it's kind of through this filter of it's the past and kind of we were kings or whatever, like it's kind of very, very kind of emboldened and fictionalized and mythologized, basically, and what are the stories that we tell about ourselves? Aren't they always become like, as soon as you tell that story, it starts to become a fiction. And then I did this amazing piece of work, and like, the world opened up to me, and it's like it's never as simple as that. It's always kind of just a whole load of weird processes and serendipity that leads to different things.
Like music does create these worlds also, like quite emotively, where you can engage with it in a different way. Like I often think about Max Richter has this amazing ballet album called Infra, which is based on the 2008 London bombings, and it's thinking about kind of what are the emotive qualities of a terrorist attack happening in a major city, kind of like what goes through your mind, how do you work through it, how do you then go back out and kind of live life in that city as you kind of are expected to. But it's that little moment in between of like the world where it's like you get to consider it, which music's quite makes that space.
I kind of really relate to that exact moment, actually. I was living in London at the time of the bombings, and that feeling that you got, that feeling from when going on the underground, that everyone was nervous about being there, that there was a kind of hyper awareness of any bags, like this sort of thing. And it was from that I actually made a piece of work which is called Sons of Slaves, which was me going onto a pack. It was soon after that time, and I went onto a packed tube train and lip synced to Gina Delgado's Sons of Slaves, because it's what is it that is getting us on this train now when we're all terrified for our lives? And it's because we need to feed our families, we need to earn money, and why, like we value that over almost our lives. And how absurd that is, but it's the reality of it. So
there's these multiple fictions that you're exploring in the piece, between sort of, the fiction of a gaming world, the fiction of a political system, and so forth. What kind of fictions are you most concerned about in the present? And maybe a little bit like for the future, but there's a lot happening right now, so maybe we'll focus on the present.
Yeah, there's a lot happening right now. I guess, I think a lot of what people were talking about and almost warning about in terms of fake news or whatever you want to call it, like who creates the narrative for how we understand the world, has even more agency today than it did, I feel like. Maybe it doesn't, but it's just as I get older it feels even more urgent. How do we tell the counter narrative? How do we undermine those large hegemonies, the kind of these ideas that there's certain forms of, I don't know, like legitimate war when it's just absurd. And how do we create a different community outside of that in order to resist and create a different sense of who we are and what we can be? I think that's where I am at in many ways.
Okay, well, we're going to end there. Thank you so much, David, for joining us and sharing your work.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's been a pleasure. I think feeling slightly more uplifted about the future, perhaps.
And yes, and as this is our last episode with Hat Hems the Couch, we want to say a special thank you for asking us to do this mini-series on technology and magic. And we'll see you back in 2 months.
Yeah. Until next time.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.